Okay, great. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erin Farley, and I am one of JRSA's research associates. For those of you who might be less familiar with JRSA, it stands for the Justice Research and Statistics Association, and we are a national nonprofit organization dedicated to the use of research and analysis to inform criminal and juvenile decision-making, and we are comprised, of a network of researchers and practitioners, which at the core include directors and staff from state statistical analysis centers. Before we go any further, I would like to thank our partners at the Bureau of Justice Statistics for making this webinar possible. And it is my pleasure today to welcome you to our webinar titled Studying the Web, Scraping the Open and Dark Web, Crypto Markets, and Discussion Forums for Intelligence. And this webinar is being led today by Dr. Richard Frank. And Dr. Frank completed a PhD in Computing Science and another PhD in Criminology at Simon Fraser University. He is currently an assistant professor in the School of Criminology at Simon Fraser University and is also the director of the International Cybercrime Research Center. He is also the associate editor-in-chief of Security Informatics, and his main research interest in cybercrime and specifically he is interested in hackers, security issues, such as online terrorism, and warfare. So we are very happy today to welcome Dr. Frank. So welcome, and what I will do is I will step out of the way and I'm going to pass you the magic ball, and that will give you the power to move the slides.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That should be it. You should be able to see the screen?
Yes, I can see the screen. You're good to go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, welcome to my presentation. Hopefully everyone will enjoy it. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat window. I will try to keep an eye on it, but I know Erin will interrupt me if there is something really relevant. Otherwise, I will periodically pause to take a breath and at the same time solicit questions. I will talk about essentially how to scrape different sections of the internet. Each one has its own challenges. Before I do that, I wanted to very briefly just show you some of the topics that we have researched within the International Cybercrime Research Center. We've looked at child exploitation material. We've looked at violent extremist websites, recruitment methods. We've looked at the location of certain things like child exploitation images. By location, I mean the geographical location of them. We've looked at forums, both in the context of violent extremism and hackers. We've looked at entire hacking communities. I will use some of these as examples throughout today. Most recently and ongoing, we have several projects looking at the dark web and trying to essentially use machine learning to automatically identify some of these websites and see if they pose a threat or not. We're trying to essentially filter out all the good things from the bad things so that we're not dealing with any good things, so that we can focus exclusively on the bad things. So today's presentation will discuss web scraping challenges in general. Then I will split off into 4 separate sections. I would like to discuss how to scrape data from websites and what sort of things you can do with that data. Then I will focus on to online discussion forums, because there are different challenges and different things you can extract from discussion forums. I will very, very briefly focus on social media, because we treat it identically to discussion forums. So whatever I say for discussion forums applies to social media. And then I will follow off or finish off with some of the things that we have done on the dark web, and how we can scrape data from the dark web to identify interesting patterns or threats or locations where drugs ship to frequently, for example. In each of these 4 sections, I will discuss the unique challenges and then illustrate some examples of some of the things that you can do. So essentially, the problem in general is that there's a massive amount of data on the internet, and doing manual searches is going to be really, really inefficient. If, for example, you're doing a study on drug prices, we recently legalized marijuana here in Canada, for better or for worse. But now there are many questions around prices, for example. How does it affect the black market? And how does how do the illicit shops benefit from the price structure that we have? For this type of thing, for example, we need to collect massive amounts of data from many different websites which report this type of thing. So we have a lot of data we need to collect from these websites in order to actually figure out what the heck is going on and figure out some trends and etc. So doing this manually is going to be really inefficient. In other contexts, if we're doing simple manual keyword searches, yes, we can do keyword searches. We can go to a forum and put in keywords that we're interested in, such as gun, shoot, and school, and then review all of the results that come up. And then we can find authors who discuss school shootings, and possibly we can find authors who are maybe going down that path, and at some point in the future, they might actually commit this. They might have a really interesting discussions about previous school shootings, or might be talking about guns in a very positive way while in the context of schools or shooting. So yes, we can use keywords to find these posts, but the problem is that there are going to be many different false positives during this keyword search process. I listed a very simple example. That post uses the exact same keywords, but the context is very different, and the sentiments around guns, shoot, and school is also very different. So if we're looking at this from a security point of view or a law enforcement point of view, this post is going to be irrelevant for us. But if we have the entire discussion forum at our disposal, we can then apply much more significant analytic techniques. So we could repose the question as saying, I have the entire discussion forum, say the 100,000 users on it. Can I now look at their posting histories and see if their discussion around sentiment and or their sentiment around schools in their discussions is changing? And if it's getting more radical, then maybe I need to investigate that user. So we can do much different types of analytics if we have the entire user base or if the entire discussion forum at our disposal. We could try to find out opinion leaders, people who are possibly becoming more radicalized, and there are techniques which help us filter down these 100,000 users into the few that are interesting. And when I say interesting, I mean from a law enforcement perspective, for example. So that's the goal. We can collect a lot of data throughout or from the internet, and we're hoping that this data will lead to some sort of intelligence. The challenge here is based on the different structure of the website, we need to apply different techniques. For example, the possibilities or the challenges from a discussion forum are different from a Web 1.0, just a static web page. So each requires slightly different strategies, and I will go through the different strategies and how each differs. But there are a couple of overall challenges regardless of the type of website that we're talking about. For example, we really do want to be good citizens when collecting data. We do not want to bombard a target website with our tools and essentially knock it offline because it's not able to handle the volume of data we're requesting from it. So this is a realistic possibility is that if we start a really targeted data collection against a specific website, then the number of requests that we throw at it will either knock the website offline. This is a denial of service attack, or it can be interpreted as a denial of service attack. Or alternatively, the administrator sees that the weekly traffic is hovering over certain numbers, and all of a sudden it spikes, and this spike is related to a single source, at which point they will simply block the source, making it impossible for us to actually collect data. So we really do need to be good citizens so that our efforts are not hindered and we can actually accomplish what we do. In general, the standard approach is that each computer makes 2 requests to a server on its own. Browsers tend to behave this way, and that is roughly the standard. If we make 1 or 2 or 3 connections, this is still fine, but we cannot make hundreds or even dozens of connections to a single website. That will immediately kick in some automated algorithms which are there to actually defend the website. In order to get around this, we do have strategies. We can limit everything to 2 requests per website, but then the data collection efforts are slower. So we would need to use multiple computers, possibly with a different virtual private network exit node, so that our data collection looks like it's coming from multiple points on the planet. So there are ways around this. We just need to spread the data collection effort by using more computers, essentially. Another challenge is that some of these websites are very large, and having 2 connections or 10 is going to be relatively slow. We might need, for some of the larger websites, sometimes it has taken us a month or so to actually crawl through the entire website and collect everything from it. But it does change. These websites do change day to day, so we actually want to revisit this website quite frequently, looking for updates. So we do need some sort of ability to revisit these websites, checking for updates, and sometimes this does require a high throughput. If we have multiple targets or multiple targeted websites, then we definitely need high throughput, because each computer will be essentially collecting data from multiple websites, 2 connections per website, and this requires a lot of data. We can burn through multiple hundreds of gigabytes of data per computer per day if we're focusing on downloading HTML, the web page, plus all of the images on it. Then the number of gigabytes does tend to go up quite significantly. In order to sort of mitigate this, we can take a single website. So if we have a single website, we can partition the website into multiple partitions, and then take a computer and assign each computer a separate partition to essentially split the work and crawl through the website much faster than if we use only a single computer. So we can distribute the work this way. We can also randomize this, so each computer will randomly pick a web page within this website and pull it down and store it. So there are ways around these ideas. We have many different tools. I checked and I did a little research on this. There are hundreds of web crawlers. Some are free, some are quite expensive, and everything in between. I have a screenshot of this just randomly because it is a very popular off-the-shelf software. You deploy it, there's an interface, you put in the website you want, and you hit a button and it downloads it. This is fine for small jobs, but if we don't want to hammer the website into submission, then we need to slow it down. This is limited to a single computer, so by slowing it down, it will significantly increase the amount of time we need to actually capture a website. And because we cannot distribute this software across multiple computers, we really just need to wait it out. So this off-the-shelf type of software doesn't work for large websites or if we want to distribute this across multiple computers. At SFU, throughout the past 8-9 years, we've developed a web crawler that we use for research purposes, and all of the research projects that I will discuss as examples throughout today essentially use this infrastructure as our data collection. And I'll talk about some of these things, like why we have image hashes and how that can benefit data collection. But essentially, what we have is a series of computers. They're all virtual machines, disposable, small. Each one is assigned a VPN exit point. To that exit point, it goes into a website and starts crawling along it. Then each computer can enter that to a different exit, and our data collection essentially looks like it's coming from multiple sources on the planet. And through this, we can crawl through a single large website quite efficiently. Alternatively, each one is running about 20 connections per simultaneous connections. So we can reach, using a single computer, we can reach into multiple websites and start retrieving pages. And at the same time, start retrieving pages from the dark web, which I will talk about. So that's roughly the infrastructure that we have to play with, and this is what we use to collect data. So we'd like to start off with a simple Web 1.0 on how we've collected, scraped data from many different websites, all static websites, not discussion forums or anything complicated, and wanted to illustrate some of the things that you can do with it. This project was specifically looking for child exploitation material and then trying to figure out where that content is. So I've talked to police and other organizations on how they collect data. Some are quite advanced and have very good softwares which will reach into websites and look through them, look at the different images and automatically go through it. But there are other agencies that are still collecting this type of thing manually, visiting websites, taking screenshots, etc., which is very cumbersome. I only know of one organization that proactively does this. So they deploy software and they scan the internet looking for child exploitation images, which is essentially what we did here. The challenge with this type of activity is that the internet is humongous, and deploying software, like deploying a human to do this, is actually quite smart because the human can recognize when they've strayed off topic. If if their task is to look for child exploitation material and they, all of a sudden they wander into sports sites or some other maybe adult pornography sites, then they realize that this is not the type of content they're looking for, and they will go elsewhere. A software is not this smart. We need some parameters to guide it. So randomly scanning the internet for child exploitation material is going to be completely useless because I would argue the 99.9999% of the content, of all content on the internet, is not going to be child exploitation material. So it's going to be the equivalent to looking for a needle in a massive haystack. So we actually need some keywords or some other form of guiding the software. And in this case, keywords, and most people in this domain or law enforcement investigating this domain will know the keywords that these individuals use. So by using these keywords, we can guide the software. The idea here is you retrieve the web page, look for specific keywords, and if the web page has those specific keywords, then you can assume that this is possibly or probably on topic. If it doesn't have any of the keywords, then we simply throw it away and move on to the next page. And we're looking for images on these web pages. So any web page that's possibly interesting might contain images. So we can also look at images. The software can pull down images, and if it finds a child exploitation image on the web page, then that web page is interesting, and we can expand from it. So we have some starting points. Let's say this starting point leads to, I don't know, Microsoft or something. We can assume that Microsoft is perfectly safe, so we stop crawling. So this is a safe domain thing. There has to be a list of domains which we know are clean. Let's say Microsoft, the crawler wanders into Microsoft, we can safely assume that Microsoft is completely clean and we've wandered into the wrong place. So we can use safe domains to guide the crawler. We can also use known images, meaning that as we're crawling along, so this web page might have 5 images on it. We could pull down all of the images. Each image has a hash value, which is the equivalent of a fingerprint. Just the same as every person has a unique fingerprint, every file, and an image being a file, will have a unique fingerprint. So we can pull down these images and fingerprint them. Then we can take a database that contains essentially a list of fingerprints and compare them. If this image has a fingerprint that we've already encountered, then we know that that image is one that has already been encountered, and we know that that image is a child exploitation image. So if this web page has images that are child exploitation material, then the entire page, the other images, are likely to be related to child exploitation material. And any page that this leads to might, or stand a good chance of it being also containing child exploitation material. So we can guide the software through these fingerprints as well. If, again, this has a link to, I don't know, Google or something, then again, we can safely assume that Google is fine. It's not going to contain any child exploitation images, and we stop crawling down here. We continue crawling the other pages, but this one's in a safe location, so we assume that it's fine. Any questions so far? There are no questions in the chat window that I see, but if you do have questions, then please do ask. I'm happy to answer. So right now, we're taking the internet, we're identifying some seed starting sites, and from those sites, we start scraping. We go out, pull down pages. Some of the pages are going to be irrelevant. The keywords are not there, the images aren't there. It's in a safe location that we safely assume doesn't require or doesn't contain any of the content that we're looking for. And there are some that do have some keywords or some images, and we continue scanning those or the pages that link from that page. And eventually, we will keep on going and going and going. Once the data collection is gone or done, we can start the analysis. The analysis in this case, if an image can be, well, there are many different types of analysis we can do. We can look at the servers that contain these child exploitation images, and we can see what domain they belong to. Let's say it's example.com. Once we know the domain, we can convert that to an IP address. Each IP address, there are databases online that will provide this information. Some are free, some are well, relatively cheap, a couple $100 maybe. These are very up-to-date databases, but they essentially take an IP address and they tell you where that IP address is, or with a very high probability. So this process is known as geolocation, and again, there are databases that will give you this type of information. So the point is, we can find child exploitation images on certain web pages. We see what website they are on. Let's say it's example.com. And then we can, through these databases, convert that to a location. So example.com is, let's say, hosted in New York, New York. We can also look at these same websites. Where are, or who owns these websites? So example.com, we can look up who registered example.com. We can do this. There are many different databases online or web services online that will tell you this. Who is XML is an excellent one. Essentially, you send a request, example.com, and it returns you back the details of the person who registered this. When you register a domain name, you have to provide some contact information. There are ways to register it anonymously, and we have found that a lot of people do register it anonymously. As far as I know, for example, here in Canada, all personal domains have to be registered anonymously. I don't know the details of why, but the point is there are going to be a lot of websites that are registered anonymously, in which case law enforcement needs to figure out warrants and things like that and then request that information. For the domains that are registered properly or easily, then you can easily retrieve the contacts. And you know it's John Doe at whatever, New York, let's say. So we can also analyze who registered these websites. An example registrant information for my own university would look like this. We have the SFU.ca, it's registered through this, and then it has some contact details. So that essentially covers the addition of these hash databases, the registrant information, and the geolocation. To illustrate what you can do with this, we collected a whole bunch of data, about 55,000 web pages and all of the images on them, starting from known child exploitation websites, which we got from our federal police here in Canada. So using those as seed points, we pulled down a whole bunch of pages and identified a whole bunch of child exploitation images, specifically these guys, on 25 websites. The images can then be analyzed for EXIF data, and this is essentially all automatic. As soon as the image is retrieved, it's fingerprinted, the EXIF data is retrieved, but these people are usually quite smart and don't tend to save the EXIF data in their images. We found no XY coordinates, which would indicate where the photo was taken, for example. Looking at where these images were, they were on many different domains. We geolocated all of them, and they fell onto about 25 locations. A lot of them were in the United States. We had some up here in Canada. Another data collection put some in Vancouver. And Western Europe also has a good collection of websites which did contain some category 1 known child exploitation images. Looking at this in more detail, we can see that at this location, that one XY coordinate, probably the location of a data center, contained 6 of these domains which contained child exploitation images. Looking at one in particular, just as an example, we see the registrant is Mikhail someone in the Russian Federation. So the content is accessed from Canada, the website is in the Netherlands, but the domain actually was registered by someone in Russia. So if you wanted to attack this from the perspective of law enforcement, then you could work with Russian law enforcement to arrest Mikhail, and I would assume that child exploitation being very bad, the Russian police would also do something about it. But assuming that's not the case, we could also shut the server down. But the problem is that as long as Mikhail is out and about, it's quite easy to replace the content. He can typically rent it for free. And the second problem is that upon more deeper analysis, we found that the content is actually not on that website. It was actually referenced in from a whole bunch of other websites. So attacking this one website, which when you visit it, you could see the images on it, and they were all child exploitation images, but the content was actually being pulled or referenced in from other websites. So by doing this type of analysis, I'm just looking at this number, for example, PicHack would be a much better target because although the images show up on Suxodro, they are actually hosted on PicHack. So by seeing the bigger picture, we can see that the target that we initially focused on is actually the wrong target. Looking at registrant information of where these servers are and how they are registered. And we can see that the majority of them are actually registered anonymously. So the website contained a large number of images that were hosted in the US but registered in the UK. Our conclusion for this as to why the servers are actually in the US is, so 71% of the servers are in the US is because that's where the infrastructure is. Netherlands, UK, United States, that's where the infrastructure is. So that's where these people tend to rent servers. This is relatively old data set, and the information was passed over to the proper law enforcement. So I don't know how the picture is at this moment, but a couple of years ago, this is what we found. We can also start mapping the contacts and then trying to identify who lives in a location that could be reachable by various law enforcement agencies. Maybe we focus on the countries that are part of the Budapest Convention because there the offenders can actually be reached. Any questions about some of the things that I've talked about? Okay, so a regular website is, I'm sure you have, you know what it looks like, but a regular website is very unstructured. And for us humans, we can focus in on a text and read it. But for a computer, it is very, very difficult to actually see the structure in this. Moving over to discussion forums, the structure is actually quite nice. We see posts very nicely laid out. The authors are always like in the exact same place within the post. The content is always in the same place within the post. So the forums are very nicely structured, and we can actually exploit this structure. So we collect the forum pages exactly the same as the Web 1.0 content, but once the page comes in, we can apply other types of analysis to it. For example, let's say we wanted the number of views for each of the threads. So we can retrieve this page. So we have the HTML, the actual code that makes up this page. Then we can apply these rules to them using a standard language, XPath. The XPath language can be implemented by any programmer, so it's nothing too specialized. It's a standard thing, which gives us a tiny portion of the web page, essentially what is in the box here. So using that rule, we have now essentially filtered into this box. And then we can apply another type of rule, an XQuery, another very standard language that any programmer could create. So this is the rule. That gives us the result of 1827. And by creating these rules of XPath and XQuery, we can essentially take everything apart in the forum. We can take apart the forum names, the descriptions, the post author, join date, rank, post content, everything that's visible on the forum, we can take apart and essentially recreate within our own data set. And this is our own data set where we have a number of hacking forums, extremist forums, and etc. We can then click into one, see all the sub-forums, and this is now a copy of the original, which can be updated continuously. So this is the forums, the right-wing white supremacist forum, Stormfront, all the threads within it, and then the actual discussions. So each post is now replicated, and then we can analyze it for general sentiment, any keywords, etc. We can look at history. How is this person posting over time? How does the forum popularity look like over time? How many people joined per day, for example? How many posts occurred per day? How do different networks look like? Apologize, I don't know why the red is not going away, but we can look at the social network of a single thread and depict larger boxes as more prevalent posters. And in this way, we can look at the social network of a sub-forum or the entire forum and see who is talking to whom often by the darker lines. Once we have the actual data, we can extract this into a social network and apply relatively any standard social network analysis program. This would allow law enforcement to pick proper targets, for example. We can do other things, for example, apply sentiment analysis to see how, what sort of trajectories are there, who is becoming more radical over time or less radical over time. We can take all of the posts from multiple forums or a single forum, find out what frequent topics are being discussed, and we can apply open tools to this, like OpenNLP or Core NLP, and this will extract all of the things, the nouns, for example, or all of the verbs that these people are talking about. We focus on nouns, and by applying sentiment analysis, and there are many different sentiment analysis programs. We use SentiStrength, which is available for free. We essentially look at all of the messages for all of the keywords and their sentiment around that specific keyword, which results in a massive spreadsheet with all of the posts going down and all of the keywords going across and the sentiment values in the middle. And by deploying or having various algorithms, we can look to see which person has the highest or lowest average sentiment score, the volume of their posts, etc. And then score each author a point. We did this for the forum Islamic-based websites looking for extremist users. So we applied this metric, which looked at the number of posts, the average length of their posts, the number of negative posts, and the number of very negative posts, and essentially compiled a composite score. People who scored high were the most extreme within the forum. So by scraping the entire forum and then applying these open and free tools to it, we can take the 26,000 users on these forums and narrow it down to a handful who are the most extreme. I have a couple of examples of the most extreme users, and given some reading on these forums as to what are they saying, when are they saying, we could start to figure out who these people are. So these two individuals, the first one posted quite a few, but very negative messages, whereas the second posted a lot of messages, but they are somewhat less negative. I have a couple of quotes. They're not that interesting right now. But essentially, by manually reviewing their posts, we could actually verify that these people are indeed negative. But we can also take this and looking at all of the posts for a single individual, we can plot them over time and then see how each individual is progressing over time. And individuals who are getting more radical might be a good person for law enforcement to pay attention to. Or if we have someone being an opinion leader, for example, that might be a good target for law enforcement to try to intervene. So by having access to the entire forum, we can actually come up with metrics like this. In another example, we pulled down 12 hacking forums that discussed all sorts of different hacking-related tools. In total, about 15 million posts spread across 430,000 users. And by assuming that each person or each username is unique, so a person belongs to a username and the username belongs to a single person, we were looking for overlaps. We were looking for people that contribute to many different forums. So these individuals contribute to 8 forums in total. And we wanted to see if information flows through these individuals. Would these individuals make good targets? If we take them out, can we somehow separate the different forums? Maybe information would not be flowing from one forum to another, and then information about tools would not make it. So, for example, an author, Fred, he tends to request a lot in forum 157, and he tends to share a lot in forum 157 and 158. So this person might be moving content from 157 to 158, for example. Another user, same idea, requesting in 159 and sharing a lot in 175. So is this person actually moving content from one to the other? We found only very, very few people that fit this profile. And interestingly enough, we found that a lot of people are actually specializing into a single forum. 95% of the individuals specialize into a single forum, which means that the current action that law enforcement is taking generally is to go after the forums. If we take out a single forum, well, because everyone tends to specialize into a single forum, this makes it very, very difficult for them to reestablish themselves in a different forum. So in this instance, by doing this analysis, we found some proof that the current tactic of law enforcement of taking down forums is actually going to hinder these hackers a lot, which is great news for us. Moving very briefly over to social media, I just want to illustrate that Facebook or Twitter, they also have the exact same structure as posts in a discussion forum. So our stance for these platforms was to load these pages in and take them apart using the exact same tactics as discussion forums, which means that these discussion forums, whatever I've talked about in the context of discussion forums, applies to social media as well. We could scan different Twitter feeds or Facebook feeds and do the exact same analytics as for discussion forums. So that's essentially it. Although social media is Web 2.0 is different than discussion forums, structurally it's the same. Therefore, we can apply the exact same things. Last is the dark web. When I say the dark web, I don't mean black Google or anything like that. Although it is dark and it is the web, it's not really what I'm referring to. There are websites on the internet that map the internet essentially, and give us some idea of how big different websites are and where they're located. But the true internet is actually estimated to be about 25 times the size of the data that Google or Bing or whatever search engine know about. So the true internet is actually much, much bigger, and that is all Google Bing, etc. No. Looked at it a different way, the internet can be the equivalent of the tip of the iceberg. This is what Google, Bing scan. But interestingly enough, the animation does not work. So interestingly enough, just similar to how an iceberg looks like, we have things underneath the iceberg. These are the more obscure sites and the actual outright legal sites. This is referred to as the deep web, and this is referred to as the dark web, although not all of the dark web is illegal. The semantic difference between the deep and the dark is the deep web is the more obscure things that are hidden behind passwords. So these are password protected, whereas the dark web is using encryption to hide. So you need specialized software or specialized networks in order to actually access it. It was developed in the 1990s by the U.S. Navy so that people abroad can actually pass messages back into the U.S. government. It was open sourced, and now it is the #1 platform for privacy conscious people. It is very decentralized, so the genie is not going back in the bottle. We cannot influence this network because it is simply too decentralized and too big. It is using the public internet infrastructure, so essentially anyone has access to it. It just uses non-standard computer protocols, ports, encryption, etc., to essentially hide the user or the sender from the recipient. Very briefly, there are 50,000 networks in the computer. The sender, Alice and Bob, let's say Alice is sending a message to Bob. Alice will pick 3. And in my example, let's say Alice picks Moscow, doesn't matter. Alice then encrypts the heck out of her message and sends it off to the first random node, where a layer of encryption is removed and passed on to the second node, where a further layer of encryption is removed and is passed on to the next node. Another layer of encryption is removed, and then eventually Bob gets the encrypted message and is able to remove the final layer of encryption. The way the encryption works is that a node can only remove one layer of encryption and cannot see the entire message. If, say, Australia is eavesdropping, they will simply see a message coming from Egypt, headed for Brazil, and it is a heavily encrypted message, and this routing essentially hides Alice's identity, Bob's identity, and the contents of the message. If through some miracle all of these points are compromised, then the entire chain is compromised, and Alice and Bob and the message are all known, which is why the paths are rebuilt every 10 minutes. So this is how the dark web bounces data around. And we have websites within this network. For example, websites that are selling drugs, fentanyl, stolen credit card data, hacking tools, or discussions around different hacking techniques. There are child exploitation material websites, or websites dedicated to this type of content. There are websites that sell guns, drugs. A lot of it is drugs. Carded products. So these are stolen bots using stolen credit cards and then resold. More credit cards, more drugs. This is Silk Road 2.0, I believe. More carded products, more guns. Hacking services. So someone put up their hacking resume, and there's a nice shopping cart to see what you want to do. And you can essentially hire this person for your job. There are websites that give you space, so you can put up your own website, no questions asked about the content. Brand-specific carded products, fake IDs, etc. So this is the content of the dark web. We scanned a large portion of the dark web, looked at many thousands of domains over the course of months, trying to figure out how websites change, how quickly they go down, how long they stay up, etc. We then manually categorized 774 and found that there are a lot of directories and static websites, but there are a lot of marketplaces and a lot of shops. When I say a lot, I mean relative to the open web. Looking at the legality, we found that of the 774 websites that we manually looked at, 52% were illegal or peddling some sort of illegal content. Comparing this to the open web, the distribution of malicious content is much, much worse. There are many e-currency sites, meaning digital currency. A lot of them are promising to duplicate the number of Bitcoins you have, which is essentially either a pyramid scheme or just an outright scam. There are many drug sites, hosting sites, pornography, everything. Once we have this data, we can apply the exact same analytics as previously. We can construct social networks. We cannot, however, figure out where these servers are hosted, which is the nature of the dark web. So we cannot actually put a location to these servers. So the possibilities that we have in analyzing dark web sites is actually less. This is where actual old school police efforts come in. They join these forums, they join and they do test drug purchases, and they try to identify the location of these markets the old-fashioned way. And there are some good examples of this working really well, and some of these sites going down because of that. Looking specifically at drugs on the dark web, which Silk Road was the most famous example, but there are many other drug sites on the dark web. The current one is Dream Market, which we are currently doing a study on, trying to figure out the most popular shipping places and destinations. And we're also trying to get an idea of the drug prices on these crypto markets. I wanted to illustrate one study which we did looking at, in this case, 28 drug selling sites that were selling drugs. These are all Russian language sites, but they were selling drugs quite openly without the need to register or anything like that. So the approach here was identical to the forum content. We pulled down these websites into a database, like all of it, and then we applied the rules, the expat expiry stuff I mentioned, and then essentially extracted everything into a spreadsheet. So all of the 28 websites were put into a spreadsheet with the websites, the drug information, the prices, the quantities, and the locations. And then using these spreadsheets, we were able to actually analyze and understand how this marketplace looks like. For example, there were 210, or about a quarter of all the drugs were synthetic cannabinoids. It's different looking at a single marketplace versus many marketplaces and trying to understand how the entire marketplace looks like. We were able to find that this marketplace was the most popular or had the most amount of drugs on it. We were able to pinpoint shipping locations where these things were being shipped to, and then draw maps, understand that the larger cities were the larger destinations. Same idea for payment methods, what sort of payment methods were popular in different areas. Bitcoin and Kiwi were the most popular. So sort of as a conclusion to all of this, I wanted to illustrate how to collect data from different types of websites and what sort of analytics you can do for them. I tried to stick to the open source tools so that this type of analytics can be recreated as easily as possible. All of the work that I talked about is published, so you can read up on it. If you would like details or the actual papers, please contact me. I have no problem sharing anything. But in general, the talk was hopefully giving you an idea of how you can get data from targeted websites for specific purposes if you are trying to understand the bigger picture. Just to summarize everything, the steps to actually do this is, first, you need to create a good question, because that question will tell you what websites and what targets you're going to scan. Scanning everything is not feasible. We need to pick really good targets. Once you've identified the targets, you can either use an off-the-shelf software, which is slow, or you can custom build something or use one of the existing custom build ones. And that's the approach we've taken. Once this content comes in, you can apply open standards or open tools like sensitive strength to extract information from this. Once that's done, you can look at this from a social network analysis perspective, etc., and try to, that should help you understand the larger patterns that go on in some of these areas. So, again, please feel free to contact me. If you have any questions or would like to see any of the research, please use my email. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We can open it up to questions. I have looking at the chart or the chat feature right now if anybody has any questions. And what we can also do during this time is launch the poll for people to complete before they exit the session. So that would be great if you can take a couple minutes to do that. While we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I was just kind of curious to where, you know, in general in the field or specifically in your own research, is there anything sort of on the horizon for you in certain things that are evolving or changing in this field of work that is kind of exciting that you think people who are listening might be interested in?
Sorry, that was a question for me?
Yes, it was. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. No, thank you. In terms of what's coming up, the crypto markets are definitely interesting. From my discussions with different law enforcement, they are very interested in some of these marketplaces because it is very difficult to actually find out who's selling and how, and especially with fentanyl, the amount that is being shipped is so small that it's very difficult to detect. Mm. So the option is not there to actually go after and intercept it in mail. You have to intercept it when it's on the marketplace. So that is definitely an issue. Another issue which the people within law enforcement that I've talked to are very mindful of is the concept of privacy and this big data, massive data collection. The public has the perception that Big Brother is spying and collecting this data. So I know here, at least in Canada, law enforcement is very conscious of how they proceed. So that they are not seen as big dragnets or fishing expeditions.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions right now, but we do have your contact information if anybody wants to reach out individually. And then we will be posting this on our webpage, so everybody can, in just a couple days, it will be available with a copy of the slides as well. And so with that, I just, in closing, want to thank you so much for taking the time to support our webinar series. We greatly appreciate it. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, please follow up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Good afternoon, everybody. Goodbye.